6 years ago, my fiance left me for my best friend the night before our 5-year anniversary. At our reunion, he laughed and said leaving me was the best decision he ever made. 10 minutes later, a man everyone in the room recognized walked in holding a 3-year-old boy. My former best friend dropped her wine glass. My name is Nia. I am 32 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful software developer, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Last Sunday, they invited me to an upscale brunch to catch up. Between mimosas and avocado toast, my mother leaned forward smirking. "You know, Nia, you are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way." I simply sipped my coffee and smiled. That night, I logged in, disabled every family credit account, and emailed my lawyer about selling the cabin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut meant privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our 4-bedroom house with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale blue. At my mother Elaine's insistence, despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary in prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight A's, joined honor societies, and desperately sought validation. That childhood trauma is exactly why I tolerated Damon for so long. I was wired to accept breadcrumbs of affection. But tonight at the Atlanta Alumni Gala, I was no longer that scared little girl from Fairfield. Tonight was about settling a different score. The crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom cast a golden glow over hundreds of successful graduates. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume roasted duck and the heavy weight of social climbing. I stood near the edge of the dance floor, holding a glass of sparkling cider. I wore a custom emerald green silk gown that draped perfectly across my shoulders. I was observing the room when the sudden shock of ice-cold liquid soaked right through the silk and hit my spine. I gasped, turning around to find Damon and Kira standing right behind me. Kira held an empty champagne flute, tilting her head with a hollow, rehearsed gasp. "Oh my goodness, Nia! I did not even see you standing there in the shadows." Kira smiled, but her eyes were cold and calculating. She wore a tight red dress that looked entirely too restrictive, and clinging to her left hand was a diamond ring that I knew for a fact was full of cloudy inclusions. Damon stepped forward, placing a possessive hand on Kira's waist. He wore a velvet tuxedo jacket that he clearly thought made him look wealthy, but the poor tailoring around the shoulders gave him away instantly. He looked me up and down, taking in the stained fabric of my gown with a look of pure disgust. 6 years! "Nia and you are still wearing off the rack," he announced. His voice was intentionally loud, designed to draw the attention of the surrounding tables. Several alumni turned their heads, conversations pausing as they tuned into the drama. Damon soaked in the attention, puffing his chest out. "Leaving you the night before our anniversary for Kira was the best financial and mental decision I ever made. Look at you, still alone, still looking out of place. We are sitting at the VIP table tonight, networking with 7-figure investors, while you are standing by the service doors." I did not cry. 6 years ago, the old Nia would have crumbled. The old Nia would have run to the bathroom in tears, overwhelmed by the public humiliation. But the woman standing before him today was a senior software developer who handled multi-million-dollar crisis algorithms. I managed high-stakes corporate disasters for a living. Damon and Kira were not a disaster. They were merely a minor glitch in my evening. I grabbed a thick linen napkin from a passing waitstaff tray and casually dabbed at the spill on my shoulder. I looked Damon directly in the eyes, refusing to break eye contact. "That is a fascinating perspective, Damon," I said, my voice perfectly level and carrying just enough volume to reach the eavesdropping guests. "Best financial decision, you say? Because if I recall correctly, 6 years ago, you did not just leave me. You waited until I was working my second shift at the data center. The second job I took specifically to pay off the $40,000 business loan you defaulted on when your first brilliant startup collapsed. Damon's confident smirk faltered slightly. He opened his mouth to interrupt, but I took a step forward, invading his personal space. And while I was working to keep a roof over our heads, I continued, "You drained our joint savings account. Every single dollar I had saved for our future. You took my money and used it to buy that cloudy piece of glass currently sitting on Kira's finger. So please do not stand here in a rented tuxedo and talk to me about financial decisions. The only reason you could afford to start your new life with her is because you funded it with my paycheck." The silence in our section of the ballroom was absolute. I could see the couples at the nearest tables exchanging wide-eyed glances. A few people even pulled out their phones pretending to text while clearly recording the confrontation. Kira's face flushed a deep angry crimson. She looked down at her ring, instinctively covering it with her other hand. "That is a lie," she hissed, stepping out from behind Damon. "You have always been jealous of me, Nia. You were always so desperate to keep him, and he simply realized he wanted a real woman, a woman who belongs in this tax bracket." I let out a soft, genuine laugh. "A real woman. Is that what you call someone who sleeps in the guest room for 6 months pretending to be my best friend, while sneaking into my fiance's bed the moment I leave for work? You two deserve each other. A thief and a traitor make a perfectly balanced household." Damon was practically vibrating with anger now. The veins in his neck stood out against his collar. "You think you are so smart?" he spat, lowering his voice to a hostile whisper. "You think because you write some code you are better than us. I am the CEO of a tech firm, Nia. I have a seat at the table tonight with Julian Sterling. Do you even know who that is? Of course you do not. He is the biggest venture capitalist in Atlanta, and he is looking for partners. By tomorrow morning, my net worth will be more than you could make in 10 lifetimes, so enjoy your wet dress." He grabbed Kira's arm roughly and pulled her away toward the center of the room, leaving me standing alone with a ruined dress and a room full of staring strangers. If you have ever had a narcissist mistake your silence for weakness, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. You are going to want to see exactly how I dismantled this man's entire life, his fake wealth, and his stolen pride in less than an hour. I tossed the damp napkin onto a nearby table. My heart was beating steadily. No panic, no tears, just pure calculated clarity. Damon wanted to play a public game of wealth and status. He wanted to use Julian Sterling as a weapon to make me feel small. What Damon did not know was that I knew Julian Sterling very well. In fact, Julian and I shared a very specific piece of legal documentation, a marriage certificate, but I was not going to reveal my hand just yet. I smoothed down the front of my dress, deciding that the champagne stains simply added character to the evening. I walked over to the bar and ordered a sparkling water with a twist of lime. From across the room, I watched Damon glad-handing former classmates, laughing entirely too loud and pointing at Kira like she was a trophy he had won at the county fair. He was performing for the crowd, desperate to project an image of undeniable success. But I had run the background checks on his company 2 days ago. I knew exactly what was hiding behind that rented velvet jacket. The real show had not even started yet, and I was ready to let him dig his grave as deep as he possibly could before I handed him the shovel to finish the job. Every lie he told tonight was just another string I was going to pull to watch his entire world unravel. I took a sip of my sparkling water, feeling the cool glass against my skin. The music swelled over the low hum of gossip that had already begun to spread from my confrontation. Let them whisper, I thought. The whispers would turn into gasps soon enough. Damon had drawn first blood with a glass of champagne, but I was about to drop an anvil on his entire existence. I took another sip of my sparkling water, watching the ice clink against the crystal glass. The band transitioned into a smooth jazz number, but the atmosphere around me remained thick with the static electricity of my encounter with Damon. People were still sneaking glances in my direction, pretending not to look while their eyes darted back and forth. That was when I saw her pushing through the crowd. Shanice. Damon's younger sister had always been a thorn in my side during our relationship. At 32, she still carried herself with the unearned arrogance of someone who believed the world owed her a favor simply for existing. Tonight she was wearing a heavily sequined silver gown that caught the chandelier light in all the wrong ways, making her look like a walking disco ball. Her hair was styled in an elaborate updo that looked stiff and uncomfortable. She marched straight toward me, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. I braced myself. The opening act was over, and it was time for the supporting cast to make their desperate entrance. Well, 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 if it is not the ghost of my brother's past, Shanice said, stopping a few feet away and crossing her arms over her chest. She looked me up and down, her face twisting into a sneer of pure condescension. I saw Damon and Kira walk away looking absolutely disgusted. I had to come see for myself if you really had the nerve to show up here tonight. Hello, Shanice, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly flat and devoid of emotion. It is a public alumni event. I have every right to be here just like anyone else. She let out a harsh, exaggerated laugh, throwing her head back. Please, Nia. We both know why you are really here. You are stalking my brother. You heard he was going to be here tonight, and you dragged yourself out of whatever miserable hole you live in just to try and ruin his evening. It is honestly pathetic. She uncrossed her arms and placed one hand on her hip, leaning forward aggressively. Look at you standing here, all by yourself in a stained dress. Where is your date, Nia? Oh wait, do not tell me. You could not find a single man willing to put up with your bitter, lonely energy. You are exactly the same miserable woman you were 6 years ago. Just a sad, bitter, lonely woman who cannot get over the fact that a real man leveled up and left her behind. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I simply let her finish her little speech. Shanice had always been Damon's biggest cheerleader, mostly because she relied on him to fund her lifestyle. When Damon and I were together, she constantly expected me to pay for her manicures, her weekend trips, and her expensive dinners. When I finally cut her off, she threw a tantrum and called me cheap. Now she was standing here trying to play the role of the wealthy socialite, defending her billionaire brother. Damon is doing better than ever! Shanice continued, her voice rising so the surrounding guests could hear her clearly. She reached into her silver clutch and dramatically pulled out a heavy key fob, dangling it from her manicured fingers. The unmistakable logo of a luxury car brand caught the light. Do you see this, Nia? This is the key to a brand new Range Rover autobiography. Black on black, custom interior. Damon bought it for me last week, just because I told him my old car was making a funny noise. That is what a real provider does. He is a multi-millionaire tech CEO now. He takes care of his real family, not dead weight like you. She jingled the keys right in front of my face, a triumphant smile plastered across her glossy lips. Damon and Kira are sitting at the VIP table, closing deals that you could not even comprehend, she bragged. They are building a legacy. Meanwhile, you are standing by the bar, alone, drinking water, and wishing you were still a part of our lives. You need to leave, Nia. You are embarrassing yourself, and you are bringing down the class of this entire event. I stared at the keys dangling from her fingers. Then I looked at her smug face. The absolute delusion running through their family bloodline was genuinely fascinating to witness. They were entirely committed to the illusion. But the thing about illusions is that they shatter the moment you introduce a single hard fact. I reached into my emerald green clutch and pulled out my smartphone. I unlocked the screen and tapped into a secure database application I used for work. As a crisis management strategist, my job required me to have immediate access to public financial registries, court documents, and credit filings. Before arriving at the gala tonight, I had run a comprehensive background check on Damon, just to know what kind of battlefield I was walking onto. But while I was in the system, I had casually run a search on Shanice as well. Old habits die hard. What are you doing? Shanice snapped, her smile faltering as she watched my fingers fly across the screen. Are you calling an Uber to go home? Because you should. No, Shanice, I said, my voice dropping into a calm, authoritative register that demanded attention. I am just verifying a few details about this incredible legacy your brother is building. You see, the wonderful thing about public financial registries is that they do not care about velvet tuxedo jackets or silver sequined gowns. They only care about the truth. I found the file I was looking for. I held the phone up, turning the brightness to maximum so she could clearly see the dense text of the financial document displayed on the screen. A brand new Range Rover autobiography, you said, I asked, tilting my head slightly. That is a beautiful vehicle. But according to the state registry, this vehicle was not bought. It was leased. And it was not leased by a multimillionaire tech CEO. It was leased under your name, Shanice, with Damon listed solely as a secondary guarantor. Shanice's face lost a fraction of its color. She lowered the hand, holding the keys, clutching them tightly against her side. "Shut up," she hissed, glancing nervously at the people standing nearby, who were now openly listening to our conversation. "You do not know what you are talking about. You are hacking or making things up." "I am reading a legally binding public document," I replied, calmly, raising my voice just enough to ensure the surrounding audience caught every single word. "Now let us look at the terms of this generous gift. You signed a subprime predatory auto loan. The interest rate is a staggering 22%. That is not a purchase, Shanice. That is financial suicide. A man who truly cared about his sister would never let her sign a contract with a 22% interest rate." I took a step closer, backing her into the edge of a cocktail table. "But it gets even better." I continued, my eyes locking onto hers with merciless precision. "According to the lien holder's active status report, you are currently 2 months behind on your payments. The grace period expired last Thursday. Do you know what that means, Shanice?" She was breathing heavily now, her chest rising and falling rapidly under the heavy sequins. Her eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape route, but the crowd had subtly formed a semicircle around us, eager to watch the drama unfold. "Stop it," she whispered fiercely, her voice trembling. "You are lying. You are just a jealous liar." "It means," I said, ignoring her weak protest, "that you are driving a ticking repo time bomb. At any given moment, a tow truck is legally authorized to hook up that black-on-black custom interior vehicle and drag it away. In fact, given the location of this gala and the aggressive nature of subprime lenders, I would be very careful about handing those keys to the valet tonight." A woman standing to my left let out a sudden, sharp laugh, quickly covering her mouth with her hand. A man next to her shook his head, whispering something to his companion. The illusion was breaking. The crowd was turning on her. Shanice looked around, realizing that everyone had heard me. The wealthy alumni she had been trying to impress were now looking at her with a mixture of pity and amusement. The heavy luxury car keys in her hand suddenly looked like a symbol of crushing debt rather than a badge of honor. Her tough, arrogant facade crumbled instantly, replaced by the panicked expression of a woman who had just been caught completely exposed. "You are a monster, Nia," she choked out, her eyes filling with humiliated tears. "You have always been a cold, heartless monster." "No, Shanice?" I corrected her, sliding my phone back into my clutch with a smooth, deliberate motion. "I am just a woman who knows how to read a contract. Now, if you will excuse me, I believe you have a VIP table to return to. Or perhaps you should go check the parking lot, just to make sure your legacy has not been towed away yet." Shanice let out a frustrated, humiliated sob. She spun around her heels, slipping slightly on the marble floor, and practically ran away from me, pushing her way blindly through the crowd. The heavy silver sequins of her dress disappeared into the sea of people, leaving behind a trail of whispers and smothered laughter. The area around the bar felt lighter, the toxic energy she had brought with her dissipating into the high ceilings of the ballroom. I turned back to the bar, smooth and unbothered, and signaled the bartender for a fresh slice of lime. The people standing near me quickly averted their eyes, pretending to be deeply engaged in their own conversations, but the shift in respect was palpable. I had not raised my voice. I had not resorted to name-calling. I had simply used cold, hard facts to completely dismantle her public attack. But the night was far from over. Shanice was merely the appetizer. The main course was still sitting at the VIP table, desperately trying to secure funding for a company that was already dead in the water. I looked across the room and spotted Damon again. He was standing near the center stage, holding a microphone he had just procured from the event coordinator. He was preparing to make his big move. He was preparing to show everyone just how wealthy and powerful he was. I smiled, taking a slow, calculated sip of my water. Damon was about to throw a punch, and he had no idea that I was already holding the absolute perfect countermeasure, ready to execute the next phase of his total destruction. The clinking of silverware and the low hum of networking suddenly died down as a sharp feedback whine echoed through the ballroom speakers. I watched from my spot near the bar as Damon practically shoved the hired master of ceremonies out of the way to seize the microphone. The MCA, dignified older gentleman in a classic tuxedo, looked baffled but stepped aside rather than cause a scene. Damon stood center stage under the brightest spotlight, adjusting his velvet jacket with one hand while gripping the microphone tightly with the other. Kira had strategically positioned herself at the front VIP table, right at the edge of the stage, looking up at him with wide, adoring eyes. It was a perfectly choreographed display of power and influence, or at least that was what they intended it to be. I crossed my arms and waited. This was classic Damon behavior. Whenever he felt his fragile authority slipping or his massive ego threatened, he immediately resorted to grand public gestures. Shanice, fleeing the room in tears after my factual takedown, had undoubtedly bruised his pride. He desperately needed to reclaim the energy of the room. He needed to loudly remind everyone present that he was the alpha male, the self-made titan of industry who had outgrown his past. "Good evening, everyone," Damon boomed into the microphone, his voice carrying that practiced artificial confidence of a late-night infomercial salesman. "I know we are all here tonight to celebrate our beloved alma mater and reconnect with old friends. But I also want to take a brief moment to talk about the future. About building something significantly bigger than ourselves." He paced the stage slowly, making deliberate eye contact with the wealthiest-looking alumni seated in the front rows. "As many of you know, my technology firm has been making some serious waves in the industry lately. We are fundamentally disrupting the market. We are changing the game. In fact, just this morning we successfully closed a massive Series A seed round. Millions of dollars in capital secured from top-tier investors who deeply believe in my vision." The crowd murmured appreciatively. A few people clapped politely. Kira beamed, looking around the room to make sure everyone was properly admiring her brilliant, successful husband. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the sheer magnitude of his absolute lie wash over me. A massive seed round, disrupting the market, millions in capital. It was a fascinating, deeply creative work of fiction. As a crisis strategist, I dealt with corporate liars every single day. But Damon's ability to lie to a room full of connected professionals was almost impressive in its sheer audacity. But Damon was just getting started with his performance. "Because I have been so incredibly blessed on this journey." Damon continued, his voice softening into a tone of sickeningly sweet faux humility. "I feel it is my absolute moral duty to give back to the community that shaped me. We cannot take this wealth with us, right? We have to build a lasting legacy." He looked down at Kira, pointing a dramatic finger toward her. "And behind every great man is an even greater woman. My beautiful wife, Kira, has been my absolute rock through this incredible journey. So tonight, in honor of Kira and the legacy we are building together, my company is officially pledging a $50,000 donation to the Alumni Scholarship Fund." The ballroom erupted into genuine enthusiastic applause. $50,000 was a significant sum even for this high-rolling crowd. The event organizers seated at the administration tables looked absolutely thrilled, hurriedly writing down notes and whispering to each other. Kira stood up and blew Damon an exaggerated kiss, soaking in the admiration and applause of the entire room. Damon waited for the applause to die down completely before raising his free hand to quiet the crowd. His expression shifted from generous benefactor to something much darker. "But as I look around this beautiful room, I am reminded that not everyone has been as fortunate." He said, his tone shifting from philanthropic to dripping with condescension. His eyes scanned the crowd deliberately, bypassing the wealthy tables and locking directly onto me, standing alone by the bar in my stained green silk dress. He pointed the microphone straight at me, extending his arm fully, so the entire room would follow his gaze. "For instance, some people are still stuck in the past, still struggling just to keep up. Nia, I see you standing back there all by yourself. It has been a rough 6 years for you, I know. But hey, every little bit helps, right? Why do not you step up right now and pledge at least $100 just to help keep the lights on for the next generation? Maybe skip buying those cheap off-the-rack dresses for a month and finally give back a little." The ballroom went dead silent. The celebratory applause died instantly, replaced by a thick, heavy tension. The atmosphere shifted from joyful networking to deeply uncomfortable in the span of a single heartbeat. Publicly calling someone out for a small donation was incredibly poor taste, but using a charity pledge as an opportunity to humiliate an ex-fiancé was a level of toxic cruelty that shocked even the most cynical socialites in the room. Heads turned rapidly in my direction. Hundreds of eyes locked onto me, expecting me to flush with embarrassment, run away crying, or shout something defensive. Kira was practically vibrating with glee, pressing her hand against her mouth to hide a malicious, triumphant smile. Damon stood on the stage, smirking widely, holding the microphone out as if genuinely waiting for my meager response. He truly thought he had trapped me. He thought he had established absolute total dominance over me in front of the most important people in our social circle. He was completely wrong. I did not flush with embarrassment. I did not break eye contact with him. My heart rate did not even elevate. Instead, I gave him a slow, chilling smile that I knew would unsettle him. I placed my glass of sparkling water gently onto the polished wood of the bar. I picked up my emerald clutch and calmly began walking. But I did not walk toward the exit doors, and I did not walk toward the stage to defend my honor. I walked deliberately, purposefully, toward the back corner of the grand ballroom where the audiovisual and technical control booth was situated. My heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor, echoing in the sudden silence of the room. The crowd instinctively parted for me, their expressions shifting from pity to intense curiosity. I was a senior corporate crisis strategist. My entire lucrative career was built on walking into burning boardrooms, taking absolute control of the narrative, and neutralizing hostile financial threats with surgical, unemotional precision. Damon wanted to play a public game of numbers, net worth, and legacy. He wanted to use fake philanthropy as a weapon to embarrass me. But in the ruthless world of corporate crisis management, there is one golden rule you never ever break. Never bluff when your opponent is holding the receipts. The audiovisual booth was elevated slightly above the ballroom floor, enclosed by a half wall of thick black draping. Inside, a young technical director in a black polo shirt was frantically adjusting sliders on a massive soundboard, looking incredibly nervous about the sudden palpable tension in the room. He looked up anxiously as I approached, my silk gown swishing softly around my ankles. "Can I help you, ma'am?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly as he looked at my determined expression. "You are really not supposed to be back here during the main event." I reached into my clutch and pulled out my sleek silver work tablet. "I need you to hand over the main HDMI input cable for the center stage projector," I said, my voice calm, but laced with a heavy corporate authority that left absolutely no room for debate or discussion. The technician blinked repeatedly, looking from my expensive tablet to the massive projection screen hanging behind Damon on the stage, which currently displayed the gently rotating gold logo of the Alumni Association. "I really cannot do that, ma'am," he stammered, taking a step back. "Only pre-approved presentations are allowed on the main screen. The gala coordinator would absolutely fire me on the spot if I let a guest hijack the feed." I leaned in slightly, resting my hands firmly on the edge of his workstation, forcing him to meet my gaze. "Look at that man standing on the stage," I said, gesturing sharply toward Damon, who was still holding the microphone, his smug smile slowly fading into a look of panicked confusion as he watched me interact with the tech booth. "That man just committed federal wire fraud in front of 500 witnesses by publicly pledging $50,000 he absolutely does not possess. I am a certified financial auditor and crisis manager. If you do not hand me that cable right now, you are going to be legally listed as an accessory to a very messy, very public financial crime when the authorities investigate this event. Hand me the cable, now." The young technician swallowed hard, thoroughly intimidated by my tone and the mention of federal wire fraud. Without another word of protest, he reached behind his primary monitor and handed me the thick black cord. "Thank you," I said smoothly, plugging the cable directly into the secure port on my tablet. I quickly navigated through my encrypted files, bypassing my own security locks with a few rapid practiced keystrokes. Damon was rapidly losing his nerve on stage. He lowered the microphone, slightly squinting into the bright, harsh stage lights, trying to figure out exactly what I was doing in the shadows of the tech booth. "What is going on back there?" Damon called out, his voice completely losing its confident boom and sounding slightly reedy and desperate. "Nia, stop making a scene and sit down right now." I did not sit down. I did not even look at him. I simply tapped the screen mirror icon on my tablet. Instantly, the giant 50-foot projection screen behind Damon went pitch black. The rotating gold alumni logo vanished, plunging the entire stage into temporary heavy darkness. A collective genuine gasp rippled through the massive ballroom. Kira stood up abruptly from her VIP chair, her hands clutching her expensive fake handbag, looking around nervously as the dynamic of the room shifted violently. Damon tapped the microphone frantically, a sharp, annoying thud echoing through the massive room. "Hey, turn the lights back on," he demanded, looking over his shoulder at the massive blank screen looming behind him. "Turn the presentation back on. I am not finished speaking." "Oh, you are absolutely finished, Damon," I whispered quietly to myself, my manicured finger hovering gracefully over the final execute button on my secure screen. "You wanted everyone in this room to know exactly how much you are worth. It is time to show them the real numbers." I pressed the button. The massive projector roared back to life, casting a brilliant, harsh white light across Damon's velvet-clad back and illuminating the entire front of the ballroom in startling clarity. But it was not the elegant alumni logo that appeared on the screen. It was a massive high-definition scan of a highly sensitive, highly confidential legal document. And the bold black letters printed at the very top of the page were large enough for every single person in the room to read with absolute perfect clarity. The massive letters at the top of the crisp white document read, "United States Bankruptcy Court, Chapter 11, Voluntary Petition." Right beneath that undeniable heading in bold black ink was the exact legal name of Damon's supposedly thriving technology firm. The filing date stamped in the top right corner was not from last year or last month. It was time-stamped at exactly 8:14 this morning. The projection was so large and so impossibly sharp that even the people standing near the exit doors could read the devastating details. For 3 agonizing seconds, nobody moved. The entire ballroom was frozen in a collective state of profound shock, trying to process the massive cognitive dissonance between the philanthropic billionaire act they had just witnessed and the undeniable legal proof of total financial ruin glowing 50 feet high on the wall. Then the whispers started. They did not start slowly. They erupted like a tidal wave across the room, echoing fiercely off the crystal chandeliers and the ornate plaster ceiling. Damon froze, his arms still partially extended, holding the microphone out toward where I had been standing moments before. Slowly, mechanically, he turned around to face the screen. I watched from the elevated tech booth as all the blood instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a pale, terrified ghost. His jaw literally dropped open. The microphone in his hand trembled violently as he stared at his own signature at the bottom of the bankruptcy petition, projected larger than life for his peers, his rivals, and his potential investors to scrutinize. Every single detail of his failure was magnified. Kira, who had been standing at the edge of the stage, soaking in the admiration of the VIP tables, let out a sharp, audible gasp. She stumbled backward, her stiletto heel catching on the carpet, causing her to bump heavily into the edge of a dining table. The wealthy alumni seated at that table, people who had been laughing and drinking with her just 5 minutes earlier, immediately pulled their chairs away from her as if her sudden poverty was a contagious disease. I stepped out from the shadows of the audio-visual booth, walking slowly to the edge of the elevated platform, so I was clearly visible to the entire room. The young technician behind me had wisely handed me a wireless headset microphone before backing away into the corner. I adjusted the small microphone near my mouth, and when I spoke, my voice echoed through the grand ballroom, cutting cleanly through the chaotic murmurs of the crowd. "A massive Series A seed round, you said?" Damon, my voice was dangerously calm, echoing with clinical precision. "Millions of dollars in capital secured from top-tier investors who deeply believe in your vision." That was a truly beautiful speech. But according to the federal government, you filed for bankruptcy protection exactly 11 hours ago. You do not have millions of dollars, Damon. You do not even have a company anymore. The court has officially seized your corporate assets. Damon snapped his head toward me, panic radiating from his wide eyes. Turn it off! He yelled into his microphone, his voice cracking in a high-pitched tone of sheer desperation. Naya, turn that off right now. This is private corporate business. You are hacking my private files. Someone call security. She is projecting stolen documents. I shook my head slowly, resting my hands on the velvet railing of the tech booth, looking down at him like a disappointed teacher. This is a public federal registry, Damon. I corrected him, my voice echoing clearly over his panicked shouts. Anyone with an internet connection and a basic understanding of due diligence can pull this exact document. Which brings me to your very generous $50,000 pledge to the Alumni Scholarship Fund. It is incredibly noble of you to want to give back to the community. Truly it is. I tapped my tablet screen, bringing up the second page of the bankruptcy filing, highlighting a specific section in bright fluorescent yellow. The projection behind Damon shifted instantly, zooming in on the highlighted text filling the screen with stark, undeniable numbers. But I am curious, Damon. I continued, letting the heavy silence in the room amplify my words. How exactly do you plan to write a $50,000 check to the Alumni Association when, according to Schedule E of your bankruptcy filing, you have not paid your own employees in 6 long weeks? The ballroom gasped collectively. This was not just a passing murmur of disapproval. It was a sharp intake of breath from hundreds of successful professionals who understood exactly what that meant in the real world. In the ruthless business environment of Atlanta, failure is sometimes tolerated, but wage theft is an absolutely unforgivable sin. It is the mark of a true coward who hides behind the hard work of others. You stood on that stage and bragged about your massive success. I pressed forward, my voice gaining a sharp authoritative edge that commanded absolute attention from every single person present. You tried to humiliate me for wearing an off-the-rack dress, while you performed the role of the generous billionaire, giving back to the community. But there are 32 software engineers, developers, and administrative staff members who have not been able to pay their rent, buy groceries, or feed their families for a month and a half because they trusted your leadership. You drained their livelihoods to keep up the grand illusion of your personal success. You stole their labor, Damon. You sat in your glass office pretending to be a titan of industry, while the people building your product were checking their bank accounts, praying a paycheck would clear so their children would not go hungry. You are parading around in luxury while your team faces eviction. Lies, Kira shrieked from the floor, pointing a shaking manicured finger at me. She is making this up. Damon, tell them she is making this up. We have the money. We are rich. We have a meeting with Julian Sterling tonight. Damon looked down at his wife, his face completely devoid of confidence. He tried to speak into the microphone, but only a dry, rasping sound came out. He swallowed hard, looking back out at the audience. The wealthy alumni who had been nodding along to his pitch earlier, the venture capitalists who had actually been considering writing him a check, were now physically stepping backward. A prominent angel investor seated in the front row stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and turned his back to the stage, walking away in absolute disgust. Others quickly followed suit, abandoning the VIP tables to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of Damon's incredibly stupid lies. I was not finished. The deep betrayal I had suffered 6 years ago, the late nights working to pay off his debts, the emotional abuse I had endured, it all fueled the absolute clarity with which I delivered my final blow. And let us talk about that beautiful velvet tuxedo you are wearing, Damon, I said, my tone dropping into something far colder. You mocked my silk gown. You stood in front of this entire room and told me to skip buying cheap clothes so I could donate to the fund. You presented yourself as a man who provides, a man who takes care of his family, a man who leveled up. I swiped the tablet screen one more time. The massive projector displayed a scanned copy of a recent bank transfer, clearly showing routing numbers and account names. That tuxedo is a custom rental from a boutique in Buckhead, I announced, reading the details off my screen. It costs $1,200 for the night. But you did not pay for it from your corporate account, did you, Damon? because your corporate accounts have been frozen for weeks. And you did not pay for it from your personal checking account because that is overdrawn by $4,000. Damon dropped the microphone. It hit the wooden stage with a loud, painful screech of feedback that made several people cover their ears. He put his hands on his head, backing away from the screen, as if it were burning him. You transferred exactly $1,500 from an account ending in 4721, I stated ruthlessly, reading the cold, hard numbers to the completely silent room. That is your 68-year-old mother's retirement savings account, Damon. You siphoned money from your elderly mother's fixed income just so you could rent a velvet jacket and stand on a stage to pretend you are a millionaire. You took the very money she needs to survive to buy yourself 3 hours of fake respect. You are not a titan of industry. You are a fraud who steals from his own mother and starves his own employees to fund a desperate delusion. The silence that followed was absolute and crushing. The kind of silence that rings loudly in your ears, pressing against your eardrums. Damon stood center stage, completely exposed, completely destroyed. Sweat was pouring down his forehead, ruining the clean lines of his expensive haircut and soaking into the collar of his stolen tuxedo. He looked desperately at the faces in the crowd, searching for a single sympathetic eye, but found absolutely nothing but contempt, disgust, and sheer horror. The elite investors he had been desperate to impress were looking at him like he was a cockroach that had crawled onto their fine china dining table. They were repulsed by his very presence. Kira stood frozen at the base of the stage, her hands trembling violently as she stared at the damning bank records. The massive illusion she had built her entire life around the narrative that she had stolen a wealthy prize from me, the belief that she was ascending to the absolute peak of high society, had just been publicly, utterly incinerated in front of the most elite crowd in Atlanta. She looked at Damon not with love or support, but with the sudden, horrifying realization that she had tied herself to a sinking anchor. The VIP table was completely empty now, entirely abandoned by anyone who mattered. The event organizers were frantically speaking into their headsets, likely calling building security to handle the fraudulent pledges and remove the disruption. I stood calmly in the tech booth, watching the empire of lies crumble into absolute dust. I had warned Damon. I had warned him not to play a public game of numbers with a corporate crisis manager who specializes in forensic accounting and tearing apart financial facades. But Kira was not ready to accept her bitter defeat. The absolute panic setting in her eyes quickly morphed into something wild and intensely dangerous. As the crushing reality of her husband's absolute failure washed over her, she realized she was losing everything: her status, her fake friends, her entire carefully curated identity that she had sacrificed her morals to achieve. Desperation is a terrifying thing when it takes hold of a narcissist. It strips away all logic and reason, leaving only raw, primal defense mechanisms and a vicious desire to inflict pain. Kira whipped her head around, locking her furious eyes with me up in the elevated tech booth. Her perfectly contoured face was contorted with pure visceral venom. If Damon could not fight back with numbers and logic, she was going to drag me down into the absolute mud with them, using the only weapon she had left. She grabbed the microphone Damon had dropped on the stage, her knuckles turning white as she gripped it tightly, and she prepared to launch the most vile, desperate personal attack of her entire life, to salvage whatever scraps of dignity she could find. Kira gripped the microphone, her knuckles white, her chest heaving as she stared up at me in the tech booth. The room was still reeling from the financial execution of her husband, but Kira was not a woman who accepted defeat gracefully. If the truth was a weapon I wielded with surgical precision, Kira preferred the messy, brutal tactics of emotional warfare. She raised the microphone to her lips, her perfectly painted face twisting into a mask of pure manufactured agony. "You think you are so incredibly clever, Nia," she shrieked, her voice trembling with an expertly crafted blend of anger and fake tears. "You come here tonight with your little stolen documents trying to destroy Damon's reputation because you are still obsessed with him. You are just a bitter, empty shell of a woman trying to drag a successful man down to your miserable level." I watched her calmly, my arms resting on the railing of the booth. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was attempting a classic diversionary tactic, pivoting away from the undeniable facts of their financial ruin and trying to make the narrative about my personal character. It was pathetic, but I let her continue, wanting the entire room to see exactly how low she was willing to sink. "You stand up there acting so superior!" Kira cried out dramatically, wiping an invisible tear from her cheek. "But we all know the real reason you are so incredibly hateful. The real reason you never moved on. It is because you are completely barren." A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom, far sharper and more shocked than the reaction to Damon's bankruptcy. The atmosphere shifted from scandalous gossip to profound discomfort. Several people physically recoiled, turning their faces away, as if the sheer cruelty of her words physically burned the air. Kira, however, fed on the shock. She mistook their horror for validation and doubled down. "That is right," she announced, pacing slightly across the stage, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "Everyone look at the great and powerful Nia. 6 years ago, while she claimed she was working so hard for Damon, she could not even do the one basic thing a woman is supposed to do. She lost the baby. She had a miscarriage because her body is broken. And she expects Damon to just stay with her out of pity. To stay tied to a broken incubator instead of finding a real woman who could actually give him a legacy and build a family." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. My breath hitched slightly in my throat, not from the public exposure, but from the sudden, sharp sting of a deeply buried memory. 6 years ago, the grueling double shifts, the constant anxiety over Damon's mounting debts, the sleepless nights spent trying to keep us afloat, it had taken a horrific physical toll on my body. Losing that pregnancy was the darkest, most agonizing period of my life. It was a trauma I had carried silently, an open wound that Damon had used as an excuse to justify his infidelity and ultimately his abandonment. And now Kira was standing in front of 500 people, weaponizing my greatest tragedy to protect her fraudulent husband. Damon, who was still standing beside her, looked momentarily conflicted. Even he, with his monumental ego and profound lack of empathy, seemed to realize Kira had crossed a line that should never be crossed in polite society. But his cowardice won out. He said nothing, allowing his wife to hurl my deepest pain into the crowd, hoping it would somehow distract from his own spectacular public failure. "You are just jealous," Kira sneered. The fake tears instantly drying up, replaced by a look of vicious triumph. "You are jealous because I gave Damon a home, a life, and the future you were completely incapable of providing. You can show all the bank statements you want, Nia, but at the end of the day, you go home to an empty house, and I go home with a man who chose me over your defective body." She lowered the microphone slightly, a smirk playing on her lips. She truly believed she had won. She believed she had struck a blow so devastating, so utterly humiliating, that I would crumble right there in the tech booth, run out of the building in tears, and leave them to salvage whatever scraps of dignity remained. She stood tall, throwing her shoulders back, confident that she had reclaimed the narrative. But Kira fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the woman she was attacking. Grief and trauma had broken me 6 years ago, yes, but it had also forged me into something entirely unbreakable. The fire she thought would consume me was the exact same fire I had used to build an empire. I did not run. I did not cry. I reached for my wireless microphone, my hand perfectly steady. I looked down at Kira, my expression devoid of anger, devoid of pain. I looked at her with pure, unadulterated pity. "That is a very compelling narrative, Kira," I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling octave that demanded absolute silence from the room. "You have certainly mastered the art of playing the victim while holding the knife. But there is a glaring flaw in your desperate attempt to humiliate me. You see, you are standing there bragging about a man who just publicly humiliated you. A man who stole from his own mother and starved his employees. If that is the legacy you are so incredibly proud of providing, then you are welcome to every single miserable second of it." Kira's smirk faltered slightly. The crowd was not turning against me as she had hoped. They were looking at her with a mixture of absolute disgust and profound horror. The cruel personal attack had backfired spectacularly entirely. alienating the few people who might have still sympathized with their financial plight. And as for my supposed jealousy, I continued, my voice rising, slightly echoing through the grand space. Let us talk about what you are actually defending. You claim you have a future. But we have just established that your husband is bankrupt, your assets are frozen, and you are currently standing on a stage in a rented tuxedo that was paid for with stolen retirement funds. So please do enlighten this entire room. Exactly what future are you so proudly marching toward, Kira? Kira's eyes darted nervously around the room, realizing her emotional attack had not neutralized the financial facts. She gripped the microphone tightly, her knuckles white, her voice rising in a desperate, panicked shriek. You do not know anything, Nia. You think you have it all figured out with your little spreadsheets, but you are wrong. Damon's company is not dead. We have a lifeline. We have. She pointed a shaking finger at me, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate hope. You think this bankruptcy filing means anything. It is just restructuring. It is a strategic move. Because tonight, right here at this very gala, Damon is securing the funding to completely wipe out that debt. The crowd murmured, a low hum of confusion rippling through the ballroom. People looked at each other, wondering who in their right mind would invest in a company that was actively stiffing its employees and filing. Chapter 11. That is right, Kira yelled, her voice cracking under the strain. You are all going to look like absolute fools for doubting him. Because tonight Julian Sterling is coming here to personally bail out Damon's company. The name hung in the air, heavy and significant. Julian Sterling, the billionaire venture capitalist, the most ruthless, powerful investor in the entire city of Atlanta, the man who could make or break a company with a single phone call. The crowd shifted, a sudden wave of genuine surprise washing over them. If Julian Sterling was truly backing Damon, it changed the entire dynamic. It meant Damon was not a complete failure. It meant he was a player in a game far above their understanding. Kira smiled, a twisted, desperate smile. Her chest heaved as she soaked in the stunned silence of the room. She looked up at me, her eyes blazing with a defiant, triumphant fire. That is right, Nia. Julian Sterling, the man who owns half of this city. He loves Damon's vision. He believes in our legacy. He is arriving any minute now to sign the term sheet that will make us completely untouchable. So take your little stolen documents and your barren, empty life, and get out of our sight before the real money walks into the room. Damon stood a little taller beside her, his panicked expression slowly morphing back into that arrogant, insufferable smirk. He believed the lie. He desperately needed to believe the lie. They both stood on the stage, clinging to the name Julian Sterling like a life raft in a hurricane, completely convinced that the billionaire was about to walk through those doors and rescue them from the total ruin I had just exposed. I looked at them standing there, so proud, so incredibly arrogant, so utterly disconnected from reality. They had played their final card. They had invoked the name of the most powerful man in the room, expecting it to act as an impenetrable shield. I slowly lowered my microphone. The corners of my mouth twitched upward, forming a genuine, relaxed smile. A smile that had absolutely nothing to do with cruelty and everything to do with absolute perfect timing. I reached up and gently tapped the side of my custom Cartier watch, checking the time. It was exactly 9:15 p.m. Julian Sterling. I said, my voice soft but amplified perfectly by the sound system. The ruthless billionaire investor, the man who is going to save your legacy and make you untouchable. That is a truly fascinating plan, Kira. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the railing of the tech booth, looking down at the stage with an expression of mild amusement. Well then, Kira, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy silence of the ballroom like a finely sharpened blade. Since he is supposedly the savior of your entire miserable existence, I suggest you turn around and face the main entrance. Because Julian Sterling is known for many things in this city, but being late to a slaughter is absolutely not one of them. Let us see exactly how much he loves your vision. Damon visibly forced himself to stand taller. He rolled his shoulders back, taking a deep breath that strained the buttons of his rented velvet jacket. He snatched the microphone out of Kira's shaking hand, stepping directly into the brightest beam of the stage lights. He was desperate to seize control of the narrative before the heavy oak doors at the back of the room opened. He needed the crowd to believe he was still a king before the emperor arrived. "Listen to me," Damon announced, his voice booming through the speakers with a forced, hearty chuckle that sounded completely hollow. Every great entrepreneur faces a period of restructuring. It is part of the game. You think the biggest tech giants in the world did not face financial hurdles before their massive breakthroughs? What Nia is projecting up there is nothing more than a strategic legal maneuver. It is a calculated pivot. And it is exactly the kind of bold, aggressive business tactic that attracts top-tier investors like Julian Sterling. He paced the width of the stage, his confidence seemingly regenerating with every delusional word he spoke. "Julian Sterling does not invest in safe, boring companies," Damon continued, gesturing expansively with his free hand. "He invests in visionaries. He invests in people who are willing to risk absolutely everything to disrupt the market." Julian looked at my metrics. He looked at the proprietary software my team built, and he saw the exact same massive potential that I do. We had a private dinner just last week at his exclusive club in Buckhead. We sat down over $200 steaks, and we hashed out the details of a partnership that is going to revolutionize the entire logistics sector. Kira stepped up beside him, nodding vigorously, her previous panic replaced by a smug mask of manufactured superiority. She linked her arm through his, leaning her head against his shoulder to present the image of an unbreakable power couple. "That is right," Kira chimed in, her voice shrill and echoing off the crystal chandeliers. "Julian Sterling is not just writing us a check. He is becoming a board member. He believes in our family legacy. He told Damon personally that our company is the most exciting venture he has seen in a decade. We are not just surviving this little restructuring phase. We are about to become completely untouchable." She pointed a manicured finger up at the tech booth where I stood watching their performance. "So you can pack up your little tablet," Kira sneered. "You can take your pathetic stolen documents and leave. Because the moment Julian walks through those doors tonight, we are signing a binding term sheet right here on this stage. A multi-million-dollar term sheet that completely wipes out our debt and propels us into a tax bracket you cannot even comprehend. We are going to be laughing about this night from the deck of our new yacht while you are still working double shifts and coming home to an empty house." Damon nodded, puffing his chest out even further. "The ink is going to dry tonight," he declared, pointing toward the main entrance. "And when it does, every single person in this room who doubted me, who took a step back from this table, is going to be begging for a meeting. But the door will be permanently closed. You are either with us right now, or you are out forever. Julian Sterling is coming to crown the new king of Atlanta Tech." The crowd remained silent, but the dynamic in the room had undeniably shifted once again. The wealthy alumni, the venture capitalists, and the social climbers were naturally drawn to power. The sheer conviction in Damon's voice, the absolute certainty with which Kira spoke of the impending term sheet, planted a seed of doubt in their minds. What if Damon was telling the truth? What if the bankruptcy really was just a high-level strategic pivot orchestrated by a billionaire? In the ruthless world of high finance, stranger things had certainly happened. A few of the investors who had stepped away from the VIP table cautiously edged their way back, not wanting to be on the wrong side of Julian Sterling's legendary temper if the billionaire truly was backing this arrogant tech bro. I stood in the elevated tech booth looking down at the incredible spectacle unfolding below me. Damon and Kira were clinging to their manufactured reality with the desperate grip of drowning sailors clutching a rotten piece of driftwood. They had built a massive, precarious house of cards, and they were currently using the name of the most feared man in Atlanta as the final, flimsy pillar to keep it from collapsing. They fully expected me to be intimidated. They expected the mention of a multi-million-dollar term sheet and a billionaire savior to crush my spirit and send me running for the exit. They expected the crushing weight of my past trauma mixed with the threat of their impending, unimaginable wealth to finally break me. Instead, I started to laugh. It was not a quiet, polite chuckle. It was a genuine, deep, terrifying laugh that rolled out of my chest and echoed through the wireless microphone. The sound filled the massive ballroom, cutting through the thick tension like a physical blow. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated amusement, mixed with the cold, clinical satisfaction of a predator watching its prey willingly walk directly into a steel trap. My laughter cascaded over the crowd, causing several guests to visibly flinch. Damon's arrogant smirk instantly vanished, replaced by a look of profound confusion and rising panic. Kira shrank back slightly, her grip on Damon's arm tightening as my laughter echoed off the ornate ceiling. People who were genuinely broken by a fertility insult or intimidated by wealth did not laugh like that. It was the laugh of someone who held all the cards, who knew the exact outcome of the game, and was simply enjoying the sheer absurdity of the opponent's desperate bluffs. I let the laughter naturally subside, taking a slow, deep breath to center myself. I lifted my left wrist gracefully, the emerald silk of my sleeve sliding back to reveal a stunning diamond-studded Cartier watch. The brilliant cut stones caught the harsh glare of the stage lights, throwing tiny fractured rainbows across the dark fabric of the tech booth walls. It was a custom piece, a first anniversary gift that cost more than Damon's entire fraudulent seed round. I tapped the crystal face of the watch twice with my index finger, a gesture of absolute total control. "Julian is a very busy man, Kira," I said, my voice dropping back into that deadly calm, authoritative register. "He manages a global portfolio worth billions of dollars. But one thing I have always deeply admired about him is that he is incredibly punctual. If he says he is going to be somewhere to execute a contract, he is exactly on time." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the velvet railing, looking directly into Kira's wide, terrified eyes. "So let us see exactly how much he loves your vision, Kira. Let us see him sign that term sheet and make you completely untouchable. Because if I am not mistaken, he is walking through those doors right now." The timing was absolutely cinematic. The very second the words left my mouth, the atmosphere in the grand ballroom underwent a massive, instantaneous transformation. The heavy double doors at the main entrance, located at the far end of the room, suddenly swung open with a loud, authoritative thud that reverberated through the floorboards. Two massive security guards dressed in immaculate black suits with discreet earpieces stepped swiftly into the room. They moved with the cold, efficient precision of men who were highly trained to neutralize any threat. They immediately flanked the entrance, taking up positions on either side of the heavy oak doors, their eyes scanning the crowd with intense, unwavering scrutiny. The gala hired event staff members who had been hovering near the entrance immediately stepped back, pressing themselves flat against the walls to get out of the way. The tension in the room skyrocketed from uncomfortable to absolutely suffocating. The air grew instantly heavy, charged with the undeniable electric current of immense power entering the space. The guests standing near the back of the ballroom quickly scrambled out of the way, parting like the Red Sea to create a wide, clear pathway leading directly from the main entrance to the center stage where Damon and Kira were standing. Conversations completely died. The clinking of glasses ceased. Even the bartender stopped pouring a drink, leaving a bottle suspended in midair. 500 highly successful professionals held their collective breath, turning their bodies toward the back of the room. The wealthy alumni, the skeptical investors, the gossiping socialites, every single pair of eyes was glued to the empty space between the two security guards. Damon stood at the very edge of the stage, his chest heaving, his hands visibly shaking. He smoothed down the lapels of his rented velvet jacket, trying desperately to project an image of calm professional readiness. He plastered a wide, welcoming smile onto his face, but his eyes betrayed a deep, primal terror. Kira stood rigidly beside him, her hands clasped tightly in front of her dress, her breathing shallow and rapid. They looked like expectant royalty waiting to receive a visiting emperor, completely oblivious to the fact that the emperor was not coming to crown them, but to completely, utterly destroy them. I remained perfectly still in the elevated tech booth, the heavy silence of the ballroom washing over me. I did not look at the doors. I kept my eyes entirely focused on Damon and Kira, savoring the absolute peak of their delusional arrogance. This was the exact moment before the devastating fall. This was the final second of their fake reality. They had built their entire identity on lies, stolen money, and the profound betrayal of my trust. They had tried to humiliate me using my deepest traumas as public weapons. Now the universe was about to hand-deliver their karma. The absolute silence in the ballroom was finally broken by the sound of deliberate heavy footsteps echoing on the marble floor of the grand foyer just outside the doors. The billionaire savior had arrived. Through the open doorway stepped Julian Sterling. At 38 years old, he possessed the kind of commanding physical presence that instantly dominated any room he entered. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the effortless predatory grace of a man who was entirely accustomed to people scrambling out of his way. He wore a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo that had clearly been tailored to the exact millimeter of his athletic frame. There was no rented velvet here. Every single detail, from the subtle sheen of his lapels to the heavy platinum watch gleaming on his wrist, radiated an aura of unimaginable generational wealth and absolute unyielding corporate power. He was the kingmaker of Atlanta, and he looked the part flawlessly. But it was not Julian's impeccable attire or his legendary terrifying reputation that caused the collective gasp to ripple through the grand ballroom. It was what he was holding. Julian Sterling, the most ruthless venture capitalist in the city. The man known for dismantling corporate empires before his morning coffee was not carrying a leather briefcase. He was not accompanied by a phalanx of aggressive corporate lawyers carrying stacks of binding term sheets. Instead, resting comfortably against his broad chest, supported easily by his strong left arm, was a beautiful, healthy 3-year-old boy. The child was a miniature replica of the billionaire. He had the same sharp, intelligent dark eyes and was dressed in a tiny, perfectly tailored black tuxedo, complete with a miniature silk bow tie and tiny patent leather shoes. The boy looked around the massive ballroom with wide, curious eyes, completely unfazed by the hundreds of people staring in absolute stunned silence. In Julian's right hand, dangling casually from his long fingers, was a sleek black garment bag bearing the unmistakable logo of a high-end European designer. The cognitive dissonance in the room was palpable and thick. The crowd had braced themselves for the arrival of a corporate shark coming to execute a massive financial bailout on center stage. Instead, they were witnessing an intimate domestic scene that completely shattered every expectation. Whispers broke out immediately among the elite guests. Why did the city's most feared investor bring a toddler to a late-night business negotiation? Where was his aggressive legal team? What could possibly be inside that garment bag? Damon and Kira, however, were completely blind to the obvious visual cues. Their sheer desperation had entirely overridden their basic critical thinking skills. In their panicked, delusional minds, Julian was here for them and only them. The child was probably just a quirky billionaire eccentricity or a prop to show he was a family man before signing the multi-million-dollar deal that would save their miserable lives from ruin. Damon practically scrambled off the raised stage, his rented shoes slipping slightly on the polished wooden steps as he rushed forward. He wiped his sweating palms frantically on the sides of his trousers, plastering a wide, desperate, obsequious smile across his face. He puffed his chest out, trying to project the image of an equal partner. Kira was right on his heels, clutching her fake designer bag, tightly smoothing her hair and adjusting her posture to present herself as the charming, sophisticated wife of a tech titan. They pushed their way aggressively through the front row of VIP tables, eager to intercept the billionaire before he could even fully survey the room. Mr. Sterling, Damon called out, his voice pitching slightly higher than usual, a clear, undeniable sign of his underlying terror. He practically lunged forward, extending his right hand enthusiastically toward the approaching billionaire. "Julian, it is so incredibly good to see you again. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We have a private room reserved in the back where we can sit down away from the noise and go over the term sheets." Kira stepped up closely beside her husband, flashing a brilliant, highly rehearsed smile, tilting her head in a way she clearly thought was incredibly seductive and charming. "We are just so thrilled you could make it tonight, Julian," she purred, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and desperate ambition. "Damon has been telling everyone here about our wonderful dinner last week at the club. We are completely ready to finalize the partnership and build this legacy together." They stood there blocking the main aisle, hands extended, smiles frozen, waiting for the billionaire savior to validate their existence in front of the most powerful people in Atlanta. Julian did not slow his confident pace. He did not extend his free hand to meet Damon's desperate, sweaty grasp. He did not acknowledge Kira's seductive smile or her cloying greeting. In fact, he did not even look at them. It was not a standard snub. A standard snub implies that you actually register a person's presence and actively choose to ignore them. Julian's reaction was far more devastating and surgical. He walked past them with the exact same level of attention one might give to a slightly annoying piece of decorative furniture in a hotel lobby. He simply adjusted his path by a fraction of an inch, gliding smoothly past Damon's extended hand, leaving the bankrupt tech CEO grasping at completely empty air. The dismissal was so absolute, so profoundly disrespectful in its casual, effortless nature, that the entire ballroom seemed to cringe simultaneously. Damon's arm hung suspended awkwardly in the air, his desperate smile freezing and then slowly cracking into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. He blinked rapidly, looking down at his own empty hand, and then turning his body stiffly to watch the billionaire walk away from him. Kira's seductive smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of stunned humiliation. She let out a soft, confused noise, stepping back as if she had been physically slapped across the face. Julian continued his deliberate march down the center aisle, the red sea of wealthy alumni and potential investors parting eagerly to give him a wide, respectful berth. His eyes, sharp and fiercely focused, scanned over the sea of faces, completely ignoring the desperate networking attempts of the people he passed. He was not looking for a business partner to fund. He was looking for me. I stood completely still in the elevated audiovisual booth, the bright stage lights casting long, dramatic shadows across the wooden floor. I watched my husband approach, a deep, profound sense of calm washing over my entire body. The intense anxiety and the toxic energy that Damon and Kira had forced into the room completely evaporated, replaced by the solid, unwavering security that Julian always provided me. As Julian reached the middle of the massive ballroom, his eyes finally found mine. A warm, genuine smile broke across his handsome face, completely transforming his ruthless corporate exterior into the deeply loving partner I knew at home. The 3-year-old boy, resting comfortably on his hip, followed his father's focused gaze. The moment the child's bright, expressive eyes locked onto my figure standing in the booth, his face lit up with pure, unfiltered joy. He did not care about the hundreds of wealthy alumni staring at him, the tense, heavy atmosphere, or the spectacular corporate execution that had just taken place moments before. He only cared about one single thing in the world. "Mommy!" The boy screamed, his high-pitched, joyful voice piercing the heavy, stunned silence of the grand ballroom with the absolute force of a sonic boom. He threw his tiny arms out eagerly, reaching toward me from across the room. "Mommy, you look so pretty." The simple, joyful word echoed off the massive crystal chandeliers and the ornate plaster ceiling, bouncing off the walls and slamming directly into the ears of every single person present. Mommy. If the revelation of Damon's bankruptcy was a tidal wave washing over the crowd, this single shouted word was a catastrophic tectonic earthquake. The ballroom, which had been humming with nervous whispers, plunged into a state of absolute total paralysis. Eyes widened impossibly far, jaws physically dropped open. The wealthy socialites, the cynical venture capitalists, the panicked event organizers, everyone slowly turned their heads, shifting their gaze in unison, from the most powerful billionaire in the city to the woman standing proudly in the tech booth, wearing a champagne-stained emerald silk dress. I smiled warmly, stepping out from behind the heavy control board and walking gracefully down the short flight of carpeted stairs that connected the tech booth to the main ballroom floor. The thick crowd parted for me immediately now, not out of pity or awkwardness, but out of sudden, profound reverence and awe. Julian met me exactly at the bottom of the stairs. He smoothly shifted our beautiful son to his left hip, leaving his right arm free. He wrapped that strong arm firmly around my waist, pulling me flush against his solid chest. He leaned down and kissed me softly, a deeply tender, passionate kiss that spoke of unwavering devotion and absolute loyalty right in front of 500 completely stunned witnesses. I wrapped my arms tightly around my son, pressing a loving kiss to his soft, warm cheek. "Hello, my sweet, brilliant boy," I whispered, breathing in the incredibly familiar, comforting scent of baby shampoo and innocence. You look so incredibly handsome in your little tuxedo tonight. He absolutely insisted on matching his dad, I said, smiling up at Julian, whose eyes were filled with nothing but pure adoration. Julian chuckled a rich, warm, incredibly deep sound that carried easily through the quiet room. I was still wearing the wireless headset microphone the terrified young technician had handed me earlier during the presentation. The small professional microphone rested perfectly near my mouth, capturing every single word of our intimate exchange and broadcasting it flawlessly over the massive state-of-the-art sound system. Julian leaned in, his lips brushing gently against my ear, but speaking clearly enough for the sensitive microphone to pick up his deep, authoritative voice. "Sorry I am late, my incredible love," he said, his words booming powerfully through the massive speakers, ensuring that every single person in the room, including the two frozen statues standing near the stage, heard him perfectly. "Leo insisted on bringing you your backup dress personally. He was very worried about the spill ruining your perfect night." Julian lifted his right hand smoothly, holding up the sleek black designer garment bag for the entire silent room to see. The absolute undeniable finality of the moment settled over the grand ballroom like a heavy, crushing lead blanket. The scattered pieces of the puzzle aggressively slammed into place in the shocked minds of the audience. The woman Kira had just publicly viciously mocked as being barren and broken was holding a beautiful, healthy 3-year-old son. The woman Damon had just publicly humiliated for wearing off-the-rack clothing and condescendingly challenged to donate $100 was currently wrapped safely in the arms of the multi-billionaire venture capitalist he had just falsely claimed was his savior. Julian Sterling, the ruthless titan of Atlanta industry. The impossibly wealthy man Damon and Kira had staked their entire fraudulent, desperate existence on was not their secret investor. He was my fiercely protective husband. The sharp, piercing sound of shattering glass finally broke the absolute paralysis that had gripped the grand ballroom. Kira, who had managed to procure a fresh $200 glass of vintage red wine during Damon's speech, completely lost all feeling in her fingers. The crystal slipped from her manicured hand and plummeted to the polished wooden floor. It exploded upon impact, sending jagged shards of glass and red liquid splashing across the toe of her heels and the hem of her dress. The dark stain spread rapidly, soaking into the fabric like blood, but Kira did not even flinch. She was entirely frozen, trapped in a state of catatonic shock. Her eyes were fixed on the beautiful, healthy toddler resting happily on Julian's hip. The child she had just viciously confidently declared I could never have was waving a small hand at the crowd. The woman she had publicly branded as a barren, broken incubator was standing bathed in the absolute adoration of the most powerful man in the state of Georgia. Damon was faring no better. His jaw had practically unhinged, hanging open so wide it gave his face a hollow, grotesque appearance. His knees physically buckled under the sudden crushing weight of reality. All the manufactured confidence, the arrogant swagger, and the condescending smirk had been entirely wiped away, replaced by a profound, sickening realization. He stared at Julian and then shifted his horrified gaze to me, his mind violently short-circuiting as it tried to process the sheer magnitude of his miscalculation. The man he had claimed was coming to save him, the billionaire he had boasted about sharing $200 stakes with, was currently kissing my forehead. The absolute sheer impossibility of the situation struck him with the force of a freight train. He had staked his entire public reputation on a fabricated relationship with a venture capitalist whose wife he was actively trying to destroy. The crowd watched this spectacular implosion with bated breath. Nobody dared to speak. The wealthy alumni who had moments ago considered Damon a potential equal now looked at him like a man standing on the gallows with the rope already tightened around his neck. Julian slowly turned his attention away from me and focused his piercing dark eyes directly on the center stage. The warm, loving expression he had just shared with our son completely vanished. His face hardened into a mask of pure, cold, unyielding authority, the kind of look that had made seasoned corporate executives break down and cry in boardrooms. He handed the black garment bag to one of his massive security guards, who had silently stepped up behind us. He kept Leo securely on his hip, his strong arm wrapping protectively around our son, while his free hand reached out to gently intertwine with my own. Julian took one deliberate step toward the stage. He simply did not need a microphone. His voice naturally commanded the space, resonating with a terrifying calm that made the air in the room feel instantly 10 degrees colder. "I understand you were just insulting my wife," Julian said, his tone slicing through the heavy silence like a freshly sharpened scalpel. The words echoed off the crystal chandeliers wrapping around Damon and Kira like a suffocating shroud. Julian did not yell. He did not raise his voice to match the frantic, desperate shrieks Kira had utilized just moments before. True power never has to shout. True power simply states a fact and allows the devastating weight of that fact to crush whoever stands in its path. "I understand," Julian repeated, his dark eyes locking onto Damon with a predatory intensity, "that you were just insulting my wife." Damon physically recoiled, taking a staggering step backward. His rented velvet jacket suddenly looked 2 sizes too large for his shrinking frame. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic squeaking sound emerged. The microphone he had dropped earlier lay forgotten on the floor, amplifying the frantic shuffling of his feet. "The woman you called Baron," Julian continued, gesturing slightly toward me with his intertwined hand, "is the mother of my incredibly healthy son. The woman you instructed to donate $100 to keep the lights on is the primary architect of her own multi-million-dollar corporate empire. You see, Damon, my wife, is not just my partner in life. She is the genius who built the crisis management firm that exclusively handles my entire global portfolio. Every single financial maneuver, every acquisition, every major structural audit my firm conducts runs directly through her desk for final approval before I ever even see it." The collective gasp from the audience meant they had just witnessed a man try to publicly humiliate the secret power behind the throne of Atlanta's biggest financial institution. Damon was not just bankrupt, he had insulted the one person who controlled the very venture capital firm he was desperate to court. Damon's entire body began to tremble. Sweat poured profusely down his forehead, stinging his eyes and soaking his collar. The profound arrogance that had fueled him all evening completely evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, terrified shell of a man. He instinctively raised both hands in front of him, palms facing outward in a desperate gesture of surrender. "Julian, please?" Damon stammered, his voice cracking wildly. "Mr. Sterling, I mean. This is all a massive misunderstanding. A terrible, horrible joke." "A joke?" Julian asked, his voice dropping an octave, the dangerous calm settling even heavier over the room. "You consider projecting stolen financial documents and weaponizing my wife's previous medical trauma in front of 500 people a joke. That is a very unique sense of humor, Damon." No, I did not mean it like that," Damon pleaded, his eyes darting between Julian, me, and the crowd. The wealthy investors crossed their arms, glaring at him with open disgust. Damon realized his social and financial life was slipping through his fingers. He was drowning and defaulted to the survival tactic he knew. He tried to pivot. He tried to act as if the personal insult could simply be swept under the rug of corporate business. "Listen," Julian, Damon said, taking a hesitant step forward, wiping his slick forehead with the sleeve of his rented jacket. "We can clear all of this personal stuff up later. It is just old history, emotions running high. You know how these alumni events get. But let us talk about why we are really here tonight. Let us talk about the business, the term sheet we discussed at the club." Kira, who had been staring blankly at the shattered wine glass and spilled wine at her feet, suddenly snapped her heavy head up. Her eyes wide and manic, she latched onto Damon's desperate pivot. "Yes," she choked out, her voice raspy and thin. "The legacy. Julian, you said you loved the vision. You said Damon's software was going to change the industry. We can move past this silly little argument. We are professionals." I squeezed Julian's hand gently, feeling a wave of revulsion wash over me. The sheer sociopathy required to stand in a puddle of shattered glass after attacking my fertility and immediately attempt to pitch a business proposal was staggering. They possessed no shame, no moral compass, and no connection to reality. Julian stared at them for a long, silent moment. He looked at Damon's sweaty, pleading face and Kira's desperate, artificial smile. The billionaire did not look angry anymore. He looked profoundly disgusted, as if he had just discovered a particularly foul-smelling mold growing on the bottom of his shoe. "You want to talk about business, Damon," Julian said softly. "Yes." Damon nodded frantically, a sick, hopeful gleam returning to his desperate eyes. "Yes, the logistics software, the seed round. If your firm injects the capital we discussed, we can reverse the Chapter 11 filing by Monday morning. I have the updated projections right here in my briefcase. I can show you the user acquisition models. We are perfectly positioned to dominate the market by the third quarter. You saw the numbers yourself." Damon's words tumbled out in a rapid, breathless rush. He was practically vibrating with the desperate need to change the subject to bury the horrific personal exposure under a pile of corporate jargon. He genuinely believed that because Julian was a ruthless businessman, the billionaire would compartmentalize the insult to his wife if the projected profit margins were attractive enough. Damon thought blind greed would ultimately conquer family loyalty, because that was exactly how his own hollow narcissistic mind operated. But Damon was blindly projecting his own severe moral bankruptcy onto a powerful man who operated on an entirely different level of absolute honor and power. Julian Sterling did not build his massive empire by making deals with pathetic, treacherous cowards. He built his legacy by identifying those toxic liabilities and utterly crushing them into the dirt beneath his expensive shoes. Julian let out a laugh. It was not a loud, booming sound, but a low, vibrating chuckle that rumbled deep in his chest. It was the darkest, most condescending sound that had ever echoed through the grand ballroom. Damon, hearing the laughter, mistakenly interpreted it as a positive sign. A desperate, eager smile stretched across his sweating face. He took another step forward, eagerly nodding his head. "Yes, exactly," Damon said, his voice trembling with a sickening mixture of hope and terror. "You see the humor in it, right, Julian? We are businessmen. We know how to separate the emotional baggage from the bottom line. The logistics software is revolutionary. We can make billions together." Julian stopped laughing. His face hardened instantly, stripping away any illusion of warmth. "Damon, the fact that you believe I would ever invest a single solitary cent into your pathetic excuse for a company is genuinely the funniest thing I have heard all year," Julian said, his voice projecting clearly across the silent room. The entire ballroom held its breath. Damon's eager smile froze and then shattered completely. "Let me clarify something for you and for everyone else in this room," Julian continued, taking a slow, deliberate step closer to the stage. "You did not have a business meeting with me last week. You had an interrogation. You sat in my private club, ate a steak you could not afford, and bragged about user acquisition models that a first-year business student could see were entirely fabricated. Your logistics software is not revolutionary, Damon. It is a poorly coded derivative mess built on outdated infrastructure. My technical team reviewed your proprietary code, and they actually laughed. They told me it looked like it was programmed by a sleep-deprived intern. Your company is a hollow shell game designed to siphon investor capital into your own pockets to fund your ridiculous lifestyle." Kira let out a sharp, whimpering sound, taking a step backward until her back hit the edge of the VIP table. The wealthy alumni sitting nearby visibly leaned away from her, wanting absolutely no association with the brutal corporate execution taking place. "If my company is so pathetic," Damon stammered, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper, "why did you even take the meeting? You are a billionaire, Julian. You do not waste your time with small startups unless you see something valuable. Why did you invite me to your club? Why did you look at my financials?" Julian turned slightly, looking back up at me where I stood on the bottom step of the tech booth. His dark eyes softened for a fraction of a second, conveying a deep, unspoken respect, before he turned his lethal gaze back to Damon. "I did not take the meeting because I saw value in your company, Damon. I took the meeting because my wife asked me to." The words landed like physical blows. Damon physically flinched, his eyes darting wildly toward me and then back to Julian. What he gasped, his voice barely audible. "My wife is the senior crisis strategist for my entire portfolio," Julian explained, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "She is the woman who actually builds the wealth you have spent the entire evening pretending to possess. When she saw your series a pitch deck cross the desk of one of my junior analysts, She recognized your name. She told me exactly who you were. Who? She told me about the $40,000 debt she paid off for you. She told me about the joint savings account you completely drained the night before your anniversary. She told me exactly how you funded the cheap, cloudy diamond ring currently sitting on your wife's finger. Kira instinctively covered her left hand, hiding the ring as if the diamonds were suddenly burning her skin. She looked at me with a mixture of absolute terror and profound hatred, realizing that I had been pulling the strings of her entire existence for weeks without her having the slightest clue. Nia asked me to arrange a meeting with you. Julian continued, taking another step forward until he was standing directly over Damon, who was practically cowering at the edge of the stage. She did not want me to invest in you. She wanted me to open the door just wide enough so you would enthusiastically walk right in and hand over your entire financial history. She wanted my forensic accountants to audit your books to see exactly where her stolen money went 6 years ago. And because you are so incredibly blinded by your own narcissism and greed, you practically tripped over yourself to hand us the exact documents she needed. Damon's face turned the color of wet ash. He realized the absolute catastrophic magnitude of his mistake. In his desperate attempt to secure funding, he had voluntarily signed over full access to his company's internal servers' bank statements and tax records to the most ruthless financial audit team in the city, which was secretly being directed by the very woman he had robbed and abandoned. He had handed the murder weapon directly to his own executioner. "You audited my books." Damon whispered, his eyes wide with sheer panic. "You had no right. That is confidential corporate information. You signed a non-disclosure agreement." Julian smiled, a cold, terrifying smile that did absolutely nothing to warm his eyes. "I signed a standard preliminary review agreement, which legally permits my team to verify the absolute accuracy of the financial claims you present during a pitch. And Damon, what my team found was not just a failing company. We found a massive, sprawling web of intentional financial crimes." The murmurs in the ballroom flared up again, a sharp, buzzing sound of wealthy people recognizing the smell of serious federal trouble. Damon took another step back, his heels slipping slightly on the polished wood of the stage. He looked desperately around the room, but there was absolutely no escape. The security guards standing by the main doors remained perfectly still, their arms crossed, blocking the only viable exit. "You stood on this stage tonight and bragged about securing millions in capital," Julian said, his voice rising slightly, ensuring every single person in the back rows heard the undeniable truth. "You pledged $50,000 to a charity while your employees are facing eviction, but the reality is far more disgusting. We tracked the capital you did manage to raise from your initial angel investors. You did not put that money into product development. You did not pay your software engineers. You funneled over $800,000 into offshore shell accounts to pay for Kira's luxury cars, your rented mansions, and the fake designer bags she loves to parade around town." Kira let out a loud, dramatic sob, covering her face with her hands. The facade was completely, utterly destroyed. Every single piece of her identity, her entire claim to high society status, was being publicly exposed as a cheap criminal fraud in front of the exact people she was most desperate to impress. "That is a lie," Kira screamed, dropping her hands and pointing a shaking finger at Julian. "We built this company. We worked hard. You are just making this up to protect her." Julian did not even look at her. He kept his eyes locked entirely on Damon, watching the bankrupt CEO crumble under the crushing weight of reality. "We did not just find the offshore accounts," Julian continued, ignoring Kira's hysterical outburst completely. "We found the forged revenue projections you submitted to the Federal Small Business Administration to secure your initial startup loans. We found the doctored payroll taxes. You have been deliberately defrauding the United States government for over 3 years, Damon. You built a house of cards out of stolen money and federal wire fraud." Damon dropped to his knees. His legs simply stopped functioning. He landed heavily on the wooden stage, his head bowed, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. "Please," he whimpered, a pathetic, broken sound that echoed through the microphone, still lying on the floor near his knees. "Please, Julian, do not do this. I will pay it back. I will sell the assets. I will give Nia her money back with interest. Just keep this quiet. We can handle this privately." Julian looked down at him with absolute unadulterated contempt. You do not have any assets to sell, Damon. Your company is bankrupt, your house is in foreclosure, and your sister's car is currently being towed from the valet lot outside. You possess absolutely nothing of value. And as for handling this privately, you lost that privilege the absolute second you decided to stand on a public stage and insult my wife's trauma. Julian adjusted his son on his hip, Leo watching the crying man on the floor with wide, curious eyes. I am a fiduciary, Damon Julian, said, his voice ringing with absolute finality. When a company presents me with fraudulent financial documents attempting to secure venture capital, I am legally obligated to report that fraud to the proper authorities. It is standard corporate policy. Julian reached into the inner pocket of his bespoke tuxedo jacket and pulled out a crisp white envelope, holding it up for Damon to see. My legal team spent the entire afternoon compiling a massive comprehensive file containing every single forged document, every illegal wire transfer, and every stolen dollar you enthusiastically handed over to us last week. At exactly 5 o'clock this evening, my lead attorney personally hand-delivered that file to the regional director of the Internal Revenue Service and the White-Collar Crime Division of the FBI. A collective gasp ripped through the room. The FBI. The IRS. This was no longer just a humiliating public rejection. This was the absolute end of Damon's freedom. He was not just going to be broke, he was going to federal prison. They are fully aware of your Chapter 11 filing, Julian continued, sliding the envelope back into his pocket. And they are fully aware that you attempted to hide over $800,000 in stolen investor capital during the bankruptcy proceedings. Your accounts are permanently frozen. Your passports have been legally flagged. And based on the conversation I had with the federal prosecutor this morning, I would highly suggest you skip the rest of this networking event and use your remaining time to find a very good, very expensive criminal defense attorney. Though considering your current financial status, you will likely be relying on a public defender. Damon let out a guttural, agonizing moan, curling forward until his forehead touched the wooden floor of the stage. He was completely broken, physically, emotionally, and legally destroyed. The massive ego, the arrogant swagger, the desperate need to prove he was superior to the woman he had betrayed, had all culminated in this exact moment of absolute, undeniable ruin. Julian turned away from the sobbing man on the floor. He walked back toward me, his expression softening the moment his eyes met mine. He had delivered the killing blow with absolute surgical precision, executing a masterclass in corporate destruction without ever raising his voice. He had used Damon's own greed to build the trap, and then he had simply allowed Damon to enthusiastically spring it on himself. I looked at the man writhing on the floor and the woman weeping uncontrollably against the VIP table. 6 years ago, they had left me with a mountain of debt, a broken heart, and a shattered sense of self-worth. They had stolen my money and mocked my pain, but tonight they were leaving with absolutely nothing. The debt had been collected with devastating interest. The truth about the bailout was not a rescue mission. It was a perfectly orchestrated federal execution, and they had proudly bought the tickets to their own demise. But the sheer magnitude of the destruction was not quite complete. While Damon remained crumpled on the wooden stage, weeping over his impending federal prison sentence, Kira was undergoing a rapid and horrifying metamorphosis. The human survival instinct is a powerful force, but the survival instinct of a narcissistic social climber facing absolute poverty is a truly terrifying spectacle to witness. Kira looked down at her husband, the man she had just claimed was a brilliant visionary, the man she had bragged about building a legacy with, and her face contorted with absolute revulsion. She did not kneel down to comfort him. She did not wrap her arms around him to offer support in his darkest hour. Instead, she took a deliberate step away from him, carefully lifting the hem of her ruined dress to avoid brushing against his shaking shoulders. She took a deep breath, physically shaking off the panic and replacing it with a mask of desperate, fragile innocence. She quickly wiped away the dark streaks of mascara under her eyes, smoothing down her hair and adjusting her posture. She turned her attention entirely away from the broken man on the floor and focused her wide, pleading eyes directly on Julian, In her deeply delusional mind, Damon was now nothing more than a sinking ship, and she was fully prepared to cut the anchor to save herself. Julian, Kira said, her voice dropping to a soft, breathy whisper that she clearly intended to sound vulnerable and alluring. She took a slow, hesitant step toward him, clasping her hands together in front of her chest. "You have to believe me. I had absolutely no idea about any of this." Damon controlled all the finances. He handled all the banking and the investors. He lied to me just as much as he lied to the federal government. Julian did not move. He kept his arms securely around my waist, his expression completely unreadable as he watched her pathetic performance. "I am a victim in this too, Julian," Kira pleaded, taking another step closer, batting her eyelashes and tilting her head. "He manipulated me. He forced me to go along with this grand illusion. I never agreed with his actions. I told him over and over again that we needed to be honest, but he was so incredibly obsessed with power and status. He is a monster, Julian. But you know I am not like him. You know I have always admired you. I have always respected your strength and your true success." She was laying it on incredibly thick, attempting to weaponize her femininity to appeal to his ego. It was the exact same tactic she had used 6 years ago to manipulate Damon into leaving me. She believed that powerful men were inherently susceptible to the desperate flattery of an attractive woman. She thought if she played the damsel in distress, trapped by a cruel, fraudulent husband, Julian might take pity on her or perhaps even find her vulnerability attractive. "Please," Kira whispered, reaching a trembling hand out as if she wanted to touch Julian's bespoke tuxedo jacket, but stopping just short of making physical contact. "Do not let his crimes ruin my life. You have the power to keep my name out of the federal investigation. You can protect me. I would do absolutely anything to prove my loyalty to you. Anything you ask." I stood silently beside my husband, feeling a deep wave of genuine nausea roll through my stomach. The sheer audacity of her betrayal was staggering. Damon was literally crying at her feet, facing years in a federal penitentiary, and she was actively attempting to seduce the man who had just orchestrated his downfall. Julian looked down at Kira's trembling hand and then slowly raised his eyes to meet hers. His face was a mask of cold, chiseled granite. "You would do absolutely anything?" Kira Julian asked, his voice dangerously low, echoing through the quiet ballroom. Kira nodded eagerly, a desperate, hopeful smile breaking through her fake tears. "Yes," she breathed, her eyes widening. "Anything. I just need a fresh start. A real man to take care of me." Julian stared at her for 3 long, agonizing seconds. Then he let out a short, sharp breath of pure disgust. He raised his free hand and snapped his fingers sharply, echoing like a gunshot through the microphone. Instantly, the massive projection screen on the stage behind Damon flickered back to life. The federal bankruptcy documents vanished, replaced by something far more colorful and deeply personal. I had anticipated many things when I planned this confrontation, but the absolute perfection of this specific moment was entirely Julian's brilliant contribution to the evening. My husband knew exactly how to dismantle a toxic ego. A giant high-definition screenshot filled the 50-foot screen. The entire ballroom let out a synchronized gasp of pure shock. It was not a financial document. It was a direct message conversation from Instagram. The interface was unmistakable. And at the very top of the massive screen, displayed in bright, bold letters for 500 people to read, was Kira's official verified social media handle, complete with her profile picture of her kissing Damon on a yacht. But she was not messaging Damon. The messages were directed to Julian's private verified business account. Damon, hearing the sudden loud gasp from the crowd, slowly lifted his head from the wooden floor. His red, tear-streaked face turned toward the massive screen. The moment his eyes registered his wife's profile picture and the text bubbles displayed beneath it, his entire body went completely rigid. "What is this?" Damon whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "This," Julian announced, his voice booming through the speakers with absolute, ruthless authority, "is the digital footprint of a traitor. You see, Damon, while you were busy stealing money from your elderly mother and your hard-working employees to fund your wife's luxury lifestyle, your wife was busy desperately trying to secure a massive financial upgrade." Julian snapped his fingers again. His executive assistant, standing discreetly in the tech booth, advanced the slide. A new screenshot appeared revealing a long, pathetic string of desperate messages sent from Kira to Julian. The timestamps clearly indicated that this deeply inappropriate conversation had been going on for the past 8 months. The messages were humiliatingly explicit. "Hey, handsome," Kira had written in one message, accompanied by a highly edited photograph of herself lounging in a luxury hotel suite. A hotel suite Damon had undoubtedly paid for with stolen investor capital. "I am so bored with boys playing business. I need a real man who knows how to treat a woman. When are you going to let me show you a good time?" The crowd erupted into chaotic whispers. Women covered their mouths in shock, while several men shook their heads in absolute disgust. Kira stood frozen in front of Julian, her desperate, seductive smile instantly melting into an expression of sheer, unadulterated horror. She looked at the giant 50-foot projection of her own desperate infidelity and then looked back at Julian, her face completely drained of color. "You, Julian," she stammered, taking a stumbling step backward. "You kept those?" "I keep everything," Kira Julian replied coldly. "When a married woman begins harassing my private accounts, sending me unsolicited, inappropriate photographs, and begging me to fund her lifestyle, I instruct my security team to document every single interaction. It is a standard protocol to protect myself from extortion. I found your desperate attempts to become my mistress incredibly pathetic." Julian snapped his fingers a third time. The final slide appeared, filling the screen with the most damning message of all. It was dated just 3 weeks prior. "I know Damon is struggling," Kira's massive projected text read. "He is weak. He does not have what it takes to run with the big dogs. I am completely exhausted pretending to respect him. If you fund my private lifestyle, Julian, I will leave him tomorrow. I will walk away from this fake marriage and be completely yours. Just say the word." The silence that followed the reading of that specific message was the heaviest, most oppressive silence of the entire evening. Damon remained on his knees, staring up at the giant screen, reading the exact words his beautiful, supportive wife had typed, while he was destroying his own life to provide for her. The illusion of their perfect power couple legacy was not just broken, it was utterly obliterated, reduced to a pile of toxic digital ash. Kira had been throwing herself at Julian Sterling for 8 straight months, offering to abandon her husband the moment a richer, more powerful man showed interest. She had offered to sell her loyalty to the highest bidder, completely unaware of the massive fatal flaw in her desperate plan. She had absolutely no idea Julian was married to me. I am a private person. As a crisis management strategist dealing with high-profile corporate disasters, I keep my personal life entirely off the internet. My social media accounts are locked down, encrypted, and completely devoid of family photographs. Julian respects my privacy entirely, never posting our relationship on his massive public profiles to protect me and our son from the aggressive media scrutiny that follows billionaires. Kira, in her shallow, completely surface-level existence, assumed that because she did not see a wife on Instagram, Julian must be a wealthy bachelor ripe for the taking. "You called me barren tonight, Kira," I said, my voice breaking the silence, echoing with a cold, heavy finality. "You stood on this stage and told this entire room that Damon left me because I was a broken incubator. You bragged that you were a real woman who knew how to satisfy a man. You claimed you were the ultimate prize." I stepped closer to the edge of the stage, looking down at her trembling, humiliated form. "But the absolute truth, the reality projected right behind you, is that for the past 8 months, you have been desperately throwing yourself at my husband, begging him to make you his secret mistress. You offered to abandon the man you stole from me just so you could secure a bigger bank account. And my husband did not even respect you enough to reply to a single one of your pathetic messages." Kira let out a loud, ragged gasp, burying her face in her hands, as the sheer weight of her total public humiliation crashed down upon her. She had been publicly exposed not just as a fraud, but as a desperate, treacherous gold digger who failed spectacularly at seducing the husband of the woman she hated most in the world. Damon slowly pushed himself up from the floor. He ignored the bankruptcy documents. He ignored the threat of federal prison. He turned his red, swollen eyes toward Kira, looking at her as if she were a completely terrifying stranger. "You offered to leave me," Damon croaked, his voice shaking with absolute rage and profound heartbreak. I stole from my mother for you. I ruined my entire life to give you everything you demanded. And you were begging another man to sleep with you. Damon, Kira cried, dropping her hands and reaching out toward him. It is not what it looks like. I was just trying to secure an investor. I was trying to play the game to get us the money. Do not touch me! Damon screamed, slapping her hands away with such violent force that Kira stumbled backward, tripping over the hem of her dress and falling hard onto the polished wooden floor right beside the puddle of spilled wine and shattered glass. The absolute destruction of their toxic partnership was complete. They had turned on each other exactly as scavengers always do when the meat runs out. They were completely exposed, entirely bankrupt, facing federal prison, and utterly despised by every single person in the room. The digital footprint had sealed their fate, proving that their entire relationship was built on a foundation of lies, betrayal, and insatiable greed. I watched them tear each other apart, feeling absolutely no pity, only the cold, satisfying closure of a 6-year-old wound finally healing. Damon remained frozen on the floor, staring at the 50-foot screen. The glowing text messages detailing his wife's desperate pleas to become another man's mistress reflected in his tear-filled eyes. The sheer absolute betrayal fractured his mind completely. He had sacrificed his relationship with me, his mother's retirement fund, and his own freedom to build a pedestal for a woman who viewed him as nothing more than a temporary stepping stone. He slowly turned his head to look at Kira, who was still sprawled awkwardly on the polished wood amidst the spilled wine. She could not even meet his gaze. She stared at the floor, her chest heaving, her fake designer bag lying discarded a few feet away. The profound silence of the ballroom magnified the heavy, wet sound of Damon's ragged breathing. He realized with crushing clarity that every single sacrifice he made for her was completely worthless. She did not love him. She loved the illusion of wealth he had illegally provided. And the moment that illusion shattered, she had enthusiastically offered her body and her loyalty to the highest bidder. The absolute devastation in his eyes was a testament to the brutal reality of his choices. He had traded a loyal partner who paid his debts for a parasite who was actively trying to jump to a richer host. Julian watched the pathetic display with cold, clinical detachment. He adjusted his hold on Leo, who had rested his head against Julian's broad shoulder, completely unaffected by the drama unfolding below. Julian then directed his attention back to the broken man on the stage. "Oh, and Damon," Julian said, his voice cutting through the heavy air with casual, devastating precision. "Since we are completely clearing the air regarding your assets tonight, there is one final piece of corporate housekeeping we need to address." Damon slowly looked up, his face pale and slack. He looked like a man who had already been executed, simply waiting for his heart to realize it had stopped beating. "Your sister Shanice was very vocal earlier this evening about the brand new Range Rover you supposedly purchased for her." Julian continued, his tone conversational, but laced with lethal intent. "She was bragging about your generosity. My wife already gracefully informed her about the predatory 22% interest rate attached to that subprime lease. But what Nia did not mention was the specific financial institution that issued that toxic loan." Julian took a single step forward, standing at the very edge of the stage, looking down at Damon like a god delivering a final, undeniable judgment. "The holding company that underwrote your sister's massive auto loan was quietly acquired by my venture capital firm 3 months ago," Julian stated. "We own the debt, Damon, which means I personally own that vehicle. And because she is 2 months delinquent, I authorized the repossession order this afternoon. The tow truck did not just happen to be in the neighborhood tonight. I dispatched it personally to collect my property." Damon let out a weak, defeated wheeze. He had absolutely nothing left to say. But Julian was not finished dismantling him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek silver phone. He tapped the illuminated screen exactly once. "And that beautiful 5-bedroom house you and Kira are currently living in?" Julian added, his voice dropping to a low, chilling pitch. "The beautiful, massive estate you heavily mortgaged to secretly fund your illegal offshore accounts. The bank holding that specific mortgage was highly motivated to offload your extremely toxic debt. My real estate division successfully purchased your mortgage last week. You have been in absolute default for 90 days, Damon. The legal grace period has officially expired today. Damon's eyes widened in absolute, unadulterated horror. He opened his mouth, trying desperately to form a word, but no sound came out. At exactly 8 o'clock tonight, while you were standing in this beautiful room drinking expensive champagne and preparing to proudly mock my wife, my property management team arrived at your residence, Julian explained smoothly. They changed the locks on every single door. They activated a completely new security system. And they taped an official expedited eviction notice directly to your massive front door. You do not have a home to return to tonight, Damon. You do not have a functioning company. You do not have a wife who actually loves you. You have absolutely nothing left in this entire world. The finality of Julian's devastating words hung heavy in the air, a heavy, undeniable verdict that officially sealed Damon's complete and total permanent ruin. For a long, agonizing moment, the grand ballroom remained perfectly silent, digesting the sheer incredible scale of the financial and social execution they had just witnessed. Then a single sharp sound broke the quiet. A low, deep boo resonated loudly from the back of the room. It was followed very quickly by another. Then a wealthy woman near the front row scoffed loudly, crossing her arms. Within seconds, the entire massive crowd turned violently on Damon and Kira. The wealthy alumni, the powerful investors, the event staff, everyone began to actively voice their absolute profound disgust. The polite, elegant networking event instantly transformed into a hostile, vicious arena. People yelled out loudly, calling Damon a pathetic fraud, a filthy thief, and a weak coward. They mocked Kira, relentlessly calling her a pathetic, desperate gold digger. The collective burning anger of 500 highly successful professionals who absolutely despised liars and cheats crashed down heavily upon the ruined couple on the stage. The gala organizers, a group of stern-looking older alumni wearing official VIP lanyards, had seen entirely enough of this horrific disruption. They signaled the head of security with sharp, decisive, angry hand gestures demanding immediate action. The massive, heavily armed security guards who had entered the room with Julian immediately moved forward, their expressions grim and strictly highly professional. Two massive guards approached Damon, grabbing him roughly by the arms and hauling his limp body violently to his feet. Damon did not resist at all, his legs dragging completely lifeless against the polished wooden floor as they pulled him away from the center stage. Another guard stepped quickly toward Kira, who scrambled backward frantically, her bare hands sliding dangerously in the spilled red wine. She tried desperately to stand up, but the guard grabbed her elbow, forcing her up roughly and marching her firmly toward the main exit. As they were being dragged forcefully down the wide center aisle, Shanice suddenly burst back into the grand ballroom through a side door. Her shiny, silver-sequined dress was torn badly at the hem, and her face was heavily streaked with dark, running mascara tears. She was hyperventilating wildly, holding her completely empty car keys in her violently shaking hands. "My car?" Shanice screamed hysterically, looking wildly around the massive, crowded room. "They took my beautiful car right out of the private valet lot." She spotted Damon being dragged forcefully by the security guards and launched herself aggressively toward him, completely ignoring the angry, hostile crowd. "You ruined my entire life!" Shanice shrieked, clawing viciously at her brother's ruined, rented velvet jacket. "You promised me you had the money. You destroyed my perfect credit score." The security guards swiftly apprehended Shanice as well, grabbing her flailing arms and easily subduing her frantic, desperate thrashing. The three of them, Damon, Kira, and Shanice, were physically pushed toward the heavy oak doors at the back of the room. The angry crowd parted widely, allowing the disgraceful procession to pass, the booing and harsh jeering echoing in their ringing ears. They were physically ejected from the elegant building, thrown out into the damp, cold Atlanta night, completely stripped of their dignity, their wealth, and their fake social status. The heavy double doors slammed shut behind them, echoing with a definitive thud that signaled their absolute exile from high society. I stood safely in the tech booth, watching the closed doors. Julian walked up the short stairs, joining me again. He placed his hand on my lower back, providing a comforting, steady warmth. The chaotic energy inside the grand ballroom slowly began to settle down. The event organizers rushed to the stage apologizing to the guests for the unexpected disturbance, while staff cleaned the shattered glass. Our son yawned, resting his small head against my shoulder, his eyes heavy with sleep. The nightmare that had haunted me for 6 long years was finally eradicated. They had walked into this gala expecting to solidify their fraudulent empire. Instead, they walked out with nothing, facing a horrific future filled with criminal trials, debt, and total isolation. They had tried to bury me. But I had simply planted a seed of absolute truth, and tonight, that truth blossomed into their total ruin. I looked at my husband and smiled, my heart finally feeling lighter than it had in over 6 long and painful years of suffering. Julian gently touched my arm and nodded toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that lined the grand foyer of the hotel. The heavy oak doors had closed behind the disgraced trio, but the exquisite architecture of the building allowed us a perfect, unobstructed view of the brightly lit lobby and the circular valet driveway just outside. I handed our sleeping son to Julian's trusted security chief. Julian and I walked slowly out of the main ballroom and stepped up to the thick, cold glass, watching the final act of the tragedy unfold. The security guards were aggressively marching Damon, Kira, and Shanice across the expansive polished marble floor of the lobby. The sheer humiliation of the public ejection had completely shattered whatever fragile alliance remained between Damon and Kira. As they were shoved forcefully toward the revolving front doors, the toxic pressure cooker of their fake marriage violently exploded. Damon suddenly wrenched his arm free from the massive guard holding him and lunged toward his wife. His face was twisted into an ugly mask of pure venom. "You absolute parasite!" Damon screamed, his voice echoing through the massive empty lobby so loudly that we could hear every single word perfectly through the thick architectural glass. "You used me. I destroyed my entire life for you. I committed federal crimes to buy you those stupid designer bags, and you were trying to sell yourself to the very man who just ruined me. You are nothing but a gold-digging traitor." Kira did not cower or back down. She lunged right back at him, her perfectly manicured hands curled into sharp claws. She shoved him incredibly hard in the chest, her face red with absolute furious rage. "A gold digger," Kira shrieked, her voice piercing the heavy air. "How can I possibly be a gold digger when you do not have any actual gold, Damon? You are a broke, pathetic fake millionaire. You drove us into a federal bankruptcy just so you could pretend to be important in front of your old friends. You lied to me every single day. You rented this stupid velvet tuxedo, and you stole money from your own elderly mother just to buy me a cloudy, cheap diamond ring. You are the biggest fraud I have ever met in my entire miserable life." The security guards quickly stepped between them, using their massive frames to physically separate the warring couple. But the physical barrier only made their verbal attacks far more vicious. Damon was practically frothing at the mouth, pointing a violently shaking finger over the guard's broad shoulder. "I gave you a lifestyle you never could have achieved on your own," Damon yelled, his rented jacket slipping awkwardly off his slumping shoulders. "You were absolutely nothing before me. You lived in a tiny apartment and wore cheap clothes. I elevated you, Kira. And the exact moment things got slightly difficult, you tried to jump into another richer man's bed. You are absolutely disgusting." Kira let out a harsh, manic laugh that sounded entirely unhinged. "You elevated me," she mocked, her voice dripping with sheer, terrifying venom. "You dragged me down into a federal criminal investigation, Damon. I am going to lose absolutely everything because of your massive, fragile ego. You could not even build a real, functioning company. You had to steal from Nia, and then you had to steal from the federal government. You are not a tech titan. You are a weak, cowardly little boy who played business and lost absolutely everything." Damon let out a deafening roar of pure primal rage. He tried desperately to push past the security guard to physically attack her, but the highly trained guard easily grabbed him by the lapels of his tuxedo and shoved him backward with incredible force. Damon stumbled wildly, his rented shoes losing all traction on the highly polished marble floor, and he fell backward, landing painfully on his backside. Kira stood over him, pointing down and laughing hysterically. "Look at you!" she screamed, clapping her hands together in a twisted display of manic joy. "The great Damon, the brilliant CEO, the incredible visionary. You are a complete, absolute joke." As Damon scrambled desperately to his feet, his face flushed with profound, humiliating defeat. The security team had finally had enough of the spectacle. They grabbed all three of them by their collars and forcefully shoved them through the heavy revolving glass doors. They stumbled awkwardly out into the damp, chilling Atlanta air. A steady, relentless rain had begun to fall, slicking the dark pavement of the circular valet driveway. The bright, harsh lights of the massive hotel overhang illuminated their absolute total disgrace. That was when Shanice, who had been crying hysterically in the background, suddenly stopped dead in her tracks. She froze, her wide eyes locked onto a massive, heavy-duty tow truck, idling right at the edge of the VIP valet zone. The operator was currently securing heavy, thick metal chains to the front axle of a beautiful, brand-new black-on-black Range Rover. It was her car. It was her, the exact vehicle Damon had supposedly bought for her to prove his immense wealth and power. Shanice let out a harrowing sound that I can only describe as a dying, wounded animal. She broke away from the group and sprinted wildly toward the tow truck, the hem of her ripped silver sequined dress dragging heavily through the muddy, cold puddles. "Stop!" she screamed, waving her arms frantically in the freezing rain. "Stop right now! That is my beautiful car. You cannot take my car away from me." The tow truck driver did not even look at her. He pulled a heavy metal lever on the side of his rig, and the massive hydraulic winch began to grind, pulling the luxury SUV violently up onto the steep flatbed. Shanice threw herself aggressively against the side of the truck, beating her bare fists against the wet, freezing metal. "Please!" she sobbed uncontrollably, the heavy rain instantly washing away the rest of her dark makeup. "I desperately need that car. It is the absolute only nice thing I have left in this world." The driver finished securing the vehicle, ignoring her frantic pleas, climbed into his dry cab, and drove away without uttering a single word. The massive Range Rover quickly disappeared into the dark, rainy night, leaving Shanice standing completely alone in the driveway. She stood in the middle of the wet pavement, completely drenched, her ruined silver dress clinging heavily to her violently shaking body. She slowly turned around, facing her brother, who was standing under the hotel awning, shivering violently in his thin velvet jacket. The profound, deep sorrow on her face instantly morphed into absolute, blind, terrifying hatred. "You completely ruined my entire life!" Shanice shrieked, marching aggressively back toward him with her fists tightly clenched. "You forced me to sign that predatory lease. You told me you would absolutely make the monthly payments. You promised me you were incredibly rich, Damon. Now I have a massive 22% interest loan defaulting permanently on my credit report. I will never be able to buy a decent house. I will never even be able to rent a normal apartment. You completely destroyed my financial future just so you could look like a big shot to your fake high society friends." Damon held his shaking hands up to back away from his furious sister. "Shanice, please," he begged, his voice cracking pathetically. "I will fix it. I promise. I just need to make a few quick calls. I will definitely get the car back for you." "Fix it!" Kira yelled loudly, stepping boldly out into the freezing rain to join the brutal verbal assault. "How are you going to possibly fix it, Damon? You do not even have a house to go home to tonight. Julian absolutely took your house. You are completely homeless. You are entirely bankrupt. You are going to federal prison for a very long time." The tough security guards, standing safely inside the dry, warm lobby, simply crossed their muscular arms and watched the chaotic, pathetic scene unfold, ensuring the toxic trio did not try to forcefully re-enter the building. Damon, Kira, and Shanice were now standing completely exposed in the pouring rain, screaming viciously at each other. Shanice was actively hitting Damon aggressively in the chest with her wet fists. Kira was shouting horrific, deeply personal insults about his manhood and his massive, epic failures. They were entirely, permanently stripped of their stolen money, their manufactured dignity, and their fake high society status. There was absolutely no glamorous escape for them, and no powerful billionaire coming to save their completely fabricated empire. I watched them tear each other to absolute shreds, the heavy rain washing away the last remaining shreds of their fake, arrogant existence. I felt Julian's strong arm pull me slightly closer, a silent confirmation that the dark chapter was finally permanently closed forever. I turned away from the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, leaving the miserable sight of Damon, Kira, and Shanice fighting in the freezing rain behind me. The heavy storm outside perfectly mirrored the absolute wreckage of their lives, but inside the grand foyer, the atmosphere was remarkably warm and calm. I took a slow, deep breath, inhaling the scent of expensive floral arrangements and roasted dinner courses, feeling the last lingering ounces of anxiety permanently leave my body. Julian gently guided me back toward the main ballroom, his hand resting securely on my lower back, a steady, reassuring presence that grounded me in my beautiful reality. The moment we stepped back through the doors, the energy in the massive room shifted entirely. The harsh, tense silence that had gripped the crowd during the confrontation was completely gone. The event organizers had wisely instructed the live band to resume playing, and a smooth, upbeat jazz melody now floated pleasantly through the air. Waitstaff moved efficiently between the tables, carrying trays of fresh champagne and clearing away the remnants of the shattered glass near the VIP section. The gala was attempting to correct its course, but there was a profound, undeniable change in how the elite guests interacted with us. As we walked slowly back toward our private table, the wealthy alumni and powerful venture capitalists did not look at me with the pity or dismissive arrogance they had displayed earlier in the evening. Instead, the crowd respectfully parted, creating a wide, clear path for us to walk through. Several prominent business owners and investors caught my eye and offered polite, deferential nods, acknowledging my true position as the senior crisis strategist and the woman who held the absolute keys to Julian Sterling's massive financial empire. I did not gloat. I did not puff out my chest or parade around the room demanding their attention the way Damon had desperately tried to do. I simply smiled gracefully, returning their nods with the quiet, unbothered peace of someone who had survived a horrific storm and successfully built a solid, unbreakable fortress from the scattered wreckage. We reached our secluded table near the back of the room, far away from the desperate networking crowds. Julian's security chief, a tall, stoic man, respectfully handed our sleeping son back into my arms. I sat down in my plush chair, settling Leo comfortably against my chest, resting my chin gently against the top of his head. He let out a soft, contented sigh in his sleep, completely oblivious to the spectacular corporate execution his father and I had just orchestrated. Julian sat down right beside me, sliding his chair close so our shoulders touched. He picked up my left hand, bringing my knuckles to his lips, and pressing a warm, tender kiss against my skin. We did not need to exchange any dramatic words. The absolute silence between us was filled with profound mutual respect and an incredibly deep, unwavering love. I looked out over the crowded ballroom, watching the hundreds of successful professionals laughing, talking, and dancing under the glittering crystal chandeliers. 6 years ago, I was a completely broken woman. I was drowning in a sea of crushing debt, working grueling double shifts at a data center, crying myself to sleep in an empty apartment after the man I loved abandoned me for my best friend. They had stolen my money, mocked my painful miscarriage, and tried to completely erase my dignity. They wanted me to disappear so they could enjoy their stolen wealth without any guilt. But as I sat there surrounded by my beautiful family and my massive success, I realized the absolute greatest truth about toxic people. They thought they buried me 6 years ago, but they did not realize I was a seed. When malicious people try to destroy you, they often push you into the exact dark, uncomfortable places where real substantial growth actually happens. The intense pain they inflicted forced me to completely rebuild my foundation. It pushed me to aggressively pursue my career, to master the art of corporate crisis management, and to eventually walk into a high-stakes boardroom where I met Julian, a man who actually valued my sharp intellect and matched my loyalty. True revenge is not about matching their toxic energy. It is not about sinking to their pathetic level, yelling insults in the street, or desperately trying to ruin their lives out of pure spite. I did not force Damon to steal from his elderly mother or defraud the federal government. I did not force Kira to desperately try to cheat on her husband with a billionaire. I simply gathered the absolute facts, stepped out of their way, and let their own insatiable greed destroy them. True revenge is elevating your life so incredibly high that your enemies completely break their own necks just trying to look up at you. It is finding absolute peace within yourself and building an empire so strong that their pathetic attempts to tear you down simply shatter against your walls. I lost a fraudulent fiance and a treacherous friend, but I gained a deeply loving husband, a beautiful son, and an incredibly successful life that is authentically mine. The universe has a brilliant, precise way of balancing the scales if you simply have the patience to let the timeline play out. Have you ever watched the universe hand deliver beautiful, absolute karma to the exact people who deeply betrayed you? Did you have to wait years to see them finally face the devastating consequences of their own toxic actions? Tell me your incredible story in the comments below. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and remember to share this video with anyone who needs a reminder of their own true worth. Let them laugh at you today, because you absolutely control the narrative of tomorrow. Stay strong out there,